and thanks for making the Parable Podcast a part of your day. I'm Danielle Zapchenk, and today you're going to meet Dr. Danisha Keating. She shares openly about growing up in poverty and in foster care to finally getting her Ph.D. It is nothing short of miraculous.
I grew up in poverty, not enough money, only one parent worked. Both parents were abusive. I was homeschooled until the middle of my freshman year in high school, and my parents did not teach us. What she was doing was just teaching us how to cook and how to live and how to take care of children. Both my parents believed that their job was to teach us that women don't get educated, that women don't work, that women stayed in the home.
Even in the hard parts of her life, God showed up. I hope you are encouraged by this conversation with Dr. Danisha Keating. Today, I am joined by Dr. Danisha Keating. Danisha is out of Southern California. She has a PhD in psychology. She is the CEO and owner of DK Educational Consulting. She's an author, and she is an advocate for those in the foster care system. Danisha, welcome. Did I miss anything?
No.
Okay.
Long intro.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's great. I know we were just talking before the show. I mean, it is super important. You got your PhD. That is amazing. Now, when did you get that?
So I finished in June of 2021. So all pandemic.
Yes. All right. Well,
all pandemic dissertation.
Well, you had nowhere to go. All right. And
did not. Might as well get it done, knock it out.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's easy in our culture where we view people on Instagram, we see people online or on TV, and we're like, oh, well, they have a PhD. They must have their life together, obviously. And everything is just really coming up roses for them. But I would believe that you would say, yes, there's some great things, but there's been some hardship in your life too as well.
Absolutely. There's been a lot. And I think the hard part is a lot of people think that if you're going for an ED or PhD or a different type of doctorate or even a master's, that you don't have anything happening. Like you have the money, you have the lifestyle to be able to do it. But the reality is life tends to hit a lot harder during those times. So you have to make that decision to go or not go through the process. Nationally, only 4% total of doctoral holders are in the US, but of PhDs, it is only 1.5%. It's very, very minimal. And the reason is because it's so hard academically. But in my life, during this whole process of getting education done through my bachelor's, my master's, and my PhD, I took in siblings at the same time. So that was kind of an overnight thing where I just get a call and they're like, hey, come do this. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And so fighting that journey through education and raising teenagers and trying to figure out how to be a mom, it's just been a whirlwind. And there is nobody's life that is perfect just because they're getting a degree. It's just different. It's a whole different ballgame. And most of the people I've met who are going for degrees, they're like, my life's a mess. It's just a mess. And this is one of the ways we're trying to make our life better is by getting the education to open certain doors to help financially. So that's usually why people enter into a degree.
Well, take me back to a childhood in Southern California. How did you grow up? What was it like?
Chaotic. So I'm actually one of 11 kids. And living in Southern California, everyone knows it's expensive. But having 11 kids in a family, that's not great. I grew up in poverty. And by poverty, it's the standard low income family, not enough money, only one parent worked. Both parents were abusive. And so that led to the doors of having CPS coming in and being like, oh, well, you have to do this, you have to do that. And we just kind of taught ourselves and it just from every aspect. So I was homeschooled until the middle of my freshman year in high school. And my parents did not teach us anything. My mom had a homeschooling group she was a part of, but it was not accredited through the state of California, meaning they just never went and did the paperwork. So it was, we're a group, and that's where it stayed. And so my mom had this idea that what she was doing was just teaching us how to cook and how to live and how to take care of children. Both my parents believed that their job was to teach us that women don't get educated, that women don't work, that women stayed in the home. So for me, it wasn't like, if you think California living, you're just like, that doesn't sound like California living. That sounds like 1800 status, not 1999 or, 1990s through 2000s. But it was reality for us, is that my parents just did not believe that women should be educated. They didn't believe that women should be outside of the home. So they had these kids. They believed that that was the calling God had on their life. And then the abuse came in, where it was a ton of different types of abuses. There was sexual, physical, emotional, spiritual abuse. And when you use God against your child to say, God hates you, do what I tell you to do, you can really damage the relationship that they have with God. And so growing up, it was just chaos. And so in high school, I was put into foster homes, and it was actually 3 days before my 16th birthday that we were picked up and moved. And I aged out at 18. And if no one knows what aging out means, it's just, there are some laws that say that you can stay until 21, but at 18, typically students are exited out of the system to say you don't have a caseworker anymore. You might not even have a home. You have to find somewhere else to live. And my CPS worker was like, hey, by the way, like, even though we've transitioned you from a foster home to your sister's house, you can't stay here because you're over the age limit. And she can't have two different children in the same room with you because you're 18 and they're under 18. So you got to go. So then I was homeless for a while. So growing up in California has always kind of been really weird for me. I'm like, oh, I could probably make it in a cheaper state. But being out here, it was just a different kind of struggle. But that was how I grew up.
Wow, Danisha, my dad is one of 11 as well, and he grew up in a home with alcohol, sexual abuse. The foster care system, I don't know if it was available to them back then. Should have been. He got out. He left, I think, when he was 15 or 16 years old, because it was too much. And I asked my dad, would you go back and would you erase it all if you could? And he said, absolutely not, because those things, as painful, as brutal as they were, they shaped who he was. What do you think about that for yourself?
100%. It doesn't just erase who you are, but it erases the opportunity to reach out to other people. So you lose a connection and compassion for other people. And there's a lot of people who can look at someone's situation and be like, oh, you're homeless, that's your own doing. They could look at grades and be like, you did that to yourself. But there's this different understanding that you get when you've been hurt, that you kind of say like, hey, maybe more is going on to this situation than what meets the eye. I could assume that maybe you blew all your money and that's why you're homeless, or I can assume that something else got you there. So if I were to erase my past, I wouldn't be where I'm at today. I wouldn't be who I am today. And I don't think I'd be able to connect with half the people that I know, because I can say, hey, I relate to that. Not, I know exactly what you're going through, but I can relate to that emotion of feeling that way. And I'm sorry. And I want to be here to help and be in your corner. So I would not change anything. My hope, though, is by sharing my story, other people can change what they're doing. And no, they're not alone, because that, I think, is more important, is how do we change what our past was? We can impact the future positively, but we have to kind of go through that healing first to be able to be like, oh, I can recognize that that was not okay. That's abuse. That's not good. And not just labeling everything like, oh, that was toxic. Oh, that was bad. Like, why was it bad? Let's dig into that. Let's talk about that. Because I think that's important.
That's so good, Danisha, because I think it's easy for us to kind of just like push the bad stuff away, or it's to push, stories away, be like, oh, I don't know if that really matters, if that's going to connect with somebody. It's hard to share, but it's in that sharing where we're able, like just what you said, to better understand someone and have empathy and continue to build relationships. So I definitely have some more questions, but since we have that context of your background, is there a certain part of your story that you specifically wanted to share today?
I'll always feel like it's hard because you're just like, oh, I don't have anything of value to share, because you're just like, oh, my story is so broken. But there's so, like, what I think when I think of this, my story at least, is that there's so many times that I look at my story and I'm like, I'm replaceable. The background's too messy. There's just too much. And I think the biggest thing is to realize that God can work through all of that. It doesn't matter how big it is. Your story could be, you got hurt and you broke your leg and you're just like, that really hurt because I didn't know how to do XYZ during that time. But there's little things that God can do and big things he can do through our story if we allow that. We don't have to be a complete open book and share every thought and every emotion. But if we were coming into the situation with our arms wide open, we get to see what God's doing when we're watching what he's asking us to do. And I think for myself, when I was 24, I took in 5 of my siblings. I got a call, like I said at the beginning, like in the middle of the night, they were like, come get your 3 younger siblings who are teenagers. And I lived in a 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom, 500 square foot apartment. And I had 6 people living in it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is insane. But even through those little messinesses, or even just the messiness of feeling self-doubt and low self-esteem, God's like, hey, look, I can redeem all of that. You're not a replaceable person. I put you here in this time, in the places you're in for a reason and a purpose. And those things hurt sometimes, but I'm watching how he's making those broken things beautiful again. And they're different. They're not what I thought they would be, but it's something that's better. You know, I would love to be like, yeah, I have a relationship with my parents. My parents changed. They're so great. And then, you know, some cool stories happen like that. But then there's the reality of it not happening. But God also putting people in our lives that it's not replacing them, but it's a better addition to help us get through those things as well.
How old were you when you brought your brothers and sisters in?
I was 24.
24. Wow.
Yeah. You know, when you should be like doing college life and stuff.
Yeah. Were you in college during that time?
I was doing my bachelor's. So it took me 8 years to get my bachelor's done. So some people are like, oh, you're 32 with a PhD. It must have been so easy. I'm like, no, not at all. But I was 24. I was in the middle of my bachelor's program. And I was going into like my last year and a half. And so when I took them in, my grades dropped. I was like, oh my gosh. But it was just insane because they were 12, 14, 16. And then the older 2 I had already was 18 and 19. So it was just like, okay, now you're taking on court dates and you're taking on putting them into school because they were homeschooled and having to get the tests evaluated, their immunizations. And I remember there was a good solid like 6 months that at least 3 times a month I was in a meeting with CPS or in the courthouse or at the health office being like, okay, we need to get this done and that done. And because there was no records of anything for them. And it was challenging because, you know, I would start to feel in the midst of my friends who were all 24 and, you know, we're all finishing our degrees, we're all being cool and stuff and working. I was raising these kids and I just like, where do I fit in? I don't have a place anymore because I was talking to older parents who were in their 40s with teenagers and I'm 24 being like, how do I not accidentally kill them? How do I not like, do I feed them? Like, I know I need to feed them, but like, how much is too much? Like you get these random weird things where you're just like, why am I even thinking that? Like, I know that they need to eat and I know that they can eat a lot because most of them are boys, but it's just this panic mode where you're just like, I don't remember anything. And my thought process, like I tell some people, I'm like, I'm older than what I am. I feel like I'm 50. I've experienced, you know, the chaoticness of a single parent. I've experienced empty nester syndrome already. And that's really hard. If people don't know what that is, it's basically when your kids move out, you just kind of lose yourself because you're just like, my whole world revolved around these kids for 7 years. And then they all grew up. And then I was just like, well, what about me? So me being able to continue from my bachelor's to my master's and then into my PhD, it was like, okay, I'm going to continue my own journey while I'm raising them. But it didn't make it easier. I don't think it even made it harder. It just made it different.
You had wrote in your bio that, you know, God is making the impossible possible. And when I'm hearing that part of your story, I see that because it just feels so overwhelming. And you said that you had felt alone in that. Did you see God bring any people into your life during that time of just like, I don't know what I'm doing, but he just came alongside you with other people? Would you say that?
Absolutely. So it's actually funny because during that time, I was only making $18,000 a year, which is very low. Like, you're just kind of like, how did you even survive? I'm like, I have no idea. Then taking on the 5 siblings. And so there's 6 of us living on $18,000. And that year we didn't feel it. We'd been living in the 1-bedroom apartment and someone helped us find a 4-bedroom townhouse that was in budget. So we moved and then my church community actually came in and they furnished the entire house, the entire 4-bedroom townhouse. Every single room had beds. Every kid had their own bed. Every kid had their own dresser. That people were dropping off dishes. They were like, oh, you're going to need toilet paper. You're going to need food for the week. Here's the gift cards. Here's Christmas presents. Here's a Christmas tree. Like things that, because it happened in November. So, holidays are already hard. And then you throw in a really life traumatic thing where these kids come in and you're like, oh my God, I don't have any money. And then when I did my taxes, they were like, oh, you made a very, very little that year. And I was like, really? Because then when I went back to my bank account, there was $32,000 that had been transferred in that year, in addition to what I had made, because people were like, here's this cash donation, here's this gift card. And that whole, I look back at that and I'm like, oh my goodness, I heard God say, be faithful and do it. And I'm like, okay. And for 9 months, I'm like, where is it, God? Where are you doing these things? And then looking back on that year, I'm like, oh, okay. So the impossible of taking on these children, doing all these things was made possible by the community that God placed me in at that time. And people showed up in ways that were insane. People were driving some of the kids to school when it was rainy because they knew that I had to work. I was working 2 jobs trying to filter it all out. And then someone's like, hey, come work here. So that way you can have 1 schedule versus 2. I was working very poorly working at a restaurant because my mind was just done. And I was just like, I'm probably the worst waitress in the world because it was just someone would say something. I'm like, what? Because I was just so overwhelmed. And they were so kind. My managers there were just like, hey, you're going through a lot. You're not going to remember the drink, but guess what? We're going to be here. We're going to help you. And then I just said, to be fair to you guys, I'm going to go look for something else. I need something that's more within the kids' schedule. And they were like, we totally get that. Working till 2:00 in the morning and then waking up at 5 to get them to school is really hard. But just people came around and people were praying and people were like, people were helpful. There were people who were like, God's going to use this and it's going to be so great and he's going to bless you. And then nothing. And I'm like, I don't see how this is working. But other people were like, hey, you need a dresser. You need beds. This is such a abnormal situation for someone your age to go through. We know you don't have this money, but being able, I think God was like, I want you to see something here, not just see furniture in your house. Because just the furniture alone, so a lot of the stuff was almost brand new. And I want to say there was probably about $30,000 worth of furniture that people were like, here you go. And it wasn't all from one person, but someone's like, here's a bed, here's a dresser, here's the dishes. You start adding that up. And then in your bank account, it shows that there was an increase. And you're like, oh, there were harder years after that, but it was the little things like, oh, they had clothes, they had shoes, they had Christmas presents that I couldn't afford. And as the parent, you're like, oh my God, I'm failing. That's, I think, a hard reality is that you're not failing. It's just really, really hard. But God can still use the people around you. So it's absolutely, he showed up and he made that impossible to possible. And I look back and I'm like, I don't know how we made it for 7 years outside of God. That's it. God was like, I'm going to show you. And I'm just like, okay, complete panic. Okay. But he did. And I look back in awe. I don't know how I'm here. I don't know how my siblings made it and they're okay. We all talk about how we feel and they're like, no, I feel okay. I feel fine. Yeah, it's hard, but it's so much better than where we were.
Wow, Danisha, that's amazing. And that's just so cool to see that community rally around you. Because I think it's easy where we just kind of, we go about our day to day. But when we get to see people, whether that's in our church community, our neighbor, and you see that single mom, or you're like, oh, those kids are always with that one woman and she maybe, she looks like she should be in college right now. It's just having that grace and that empathy to be like, can I help you? So you said that you grew up and your parents, you had faith in your life and there was spiritual abuse. How does one go through that and still see God and continue to build a relationship? What were you thinking? Because it seems so fractured and you're just like, why would you even continue to believe in God?
That's a hard question. So just to give context, because people might be like, well, what's spiritual abuse? What does that consist of? Spiritual abuse is when you use the Bible or prayer to tell somebody I'm praying for you because Jesus hates you, using the Bible to manipulate and say, well, this verse says that children should obey their parents. And I'm like, but the next verse says parents, don't piss your kids off. Like, don't terrorize your children. It doesn't say that, but it just says, like, don't exacerbate them. Don't go and taunt them. That's what that means when we read that verse. And typically, what was happening was, my dad would just be like, well, Genesis says that, babies should be coming from women and that's it. And then you're just like, but that is the Old Testament. But if you look at the Old and New Testament, you have to look at it in context. And a lot of people don't do that. So they learn this Bible and they read the Bible. And my parents were doing that. They knew the Bible, but they didn't let the Bible impact their heart. So then they would turn around and be like, I'm praying. Like my mom has said multiple times, I'm praying that you get abused when you get married. Like she told me that at like 15. I pray that you'd be raped. I pray this for your life. And I'm like, why would you do that? And I think by the grace of God, he sent people along the way to be like, hey, that is not who God is. God does not come to you and say, you pissed me off, I'm going to show you. It's the opposite. There is this love story in the Bible where if we look from Old Testament to the New Testament, from Genesis to Revelations, we see this love story of where he's giving grace upon grace upon grace. And he's saying, hey, there are, people will say, well, he destroyed things. It's like, go look at the context. Go look at what he was destroying, because he wasn't like, this individual who's faithful to me, I'm going to destroy it. If we look at the book of Job, he was proving that Job's faithfulness was in God and he trusted God. And that's the thing that I think when God's like, hey, I'm going to allow this to happen. I'm going to let people make their decisions. We make our own decisions. God did not say, okay, Danisha's mom and dad, you guys are going to go do this and I'm going to plant the seed in you. Those were decisions my parents made on their own. And learning about who God is, I realized that we have the free will to act in the way that we do, but it doesn't go unseen. God will hold that not over them, but he will hold them to that and say, hey, these are the things that you did, and you did not ask for forgiveness. You did not come to me and say, I'm so sorry, Lord, I asked for this. I don't know what their relationship is, but what I do know is who they are and who they pretend to be are totally different things. And so I realized that through counseling, through mentors who were like, hey, we see this and we understand, like, you've gone through a lot and your parents may have been misleading in who Jesus is. It took digging into the Bible myself before that. I put God on a timeout in high school. And I just said, like, I don't want a relationship with you because I was so tired of being hurt. But there was a parent when I was taken into foster homes. She was like, I'm going to pray with you and you're going to trust God. And we're not going to yell at him. We're going to be mad, but we're not going to curse him. That's not good. And I'm like, okay, fine. But she was just like, what your parents have displayed is not Jesus. What your parents have displayed is not who a Christian is. And on their behalf, these people apologized and they just said, I'm so sorry, but I want to show you something different. I want to be able to show you who that is. I want you to read this scripture. I want to walk in the context with that. What questions do you have? And if it wasn't for God placing those people in my life, I would not have learned who he was. But it also took me digging into the Bible and being like, okay, and I knew God existed way before those things happened with my parents. I was 4 years old for the first time I heard God's voice and like his direction. And I was like, what is this? But I also had, again, those parents and those adults coming along and being like, hey, I see this. And I want you to know that that's not who God is. And so that I think is so important for people to do, is that when they recognize someone has been verbally or spiritually abused, is to say, hey, I recognize that you're saying this to yourself. I recognize that you really believe that God hates you. And I know you feel that way, but I want to call that out and show you in the Bible where it says he does not hate you. He loves you. He wants to chase after you. And I think that's where, again, that impossible only comes through God, because I couldn't do that myself. But I did have a choice to walk away or not. And it has taken a lot of hard work of like going to counseling, reading the Bible to say like, hey, I don't understand this, asking the questions and finding people who can answer. Because some people will be like, I don't know, good luck, peace out. And you're like, who can answer this? And sometimes it's digging into different books of the Bible and asking people who you trust that would be able to say, I don't know, but let's find out together.
Danisha, that's so good about clarifying what spiritual abuse is. I probably just only in the last few years recognized and heard about that and started learning about it. And it's horribly sad. But just to have that awareness is really important, because when we hear shameful things, or if we hear just negativity and then being used to like funnel that through God, that's when like our sensors need to be going off and be like, no, because I know God is true. He is righteous and holy, and he would never be speaking those things into my life. We, live in a world like there are so many broken promises because there are broken people. What is your relationship like? And obviously, as a psychologist now, you recognize there's boundaries and things that need to be in place to protect you and your brothers and sisters. What's the relationship like with your parents or your brothers and sisters?
So first, I want to make sure I want people to know I'm not a psychologist. I have a psychology degree. I just because that's a big misconception. So I can't diagnose anybody. I can't give, I do research more so. I like to make sure that people know that, just because there's a massive difference. Psychologists, if you don't know, they're on the clinical side, but then there's psychology and I'm on the research side. I like papers. I like writing papers. But yeah, just I like to make sure that people do know that that's awareness. The same thing as like being called a doctor is the same thing as I'm not a medical doctor. I'm just a doctor within psychology. And that's very different too. So please don't come to me asking for medical advice. I will be like, go to your doctor. So the relationship with me and my siblings and my parents is we all have our own relationships, but I don't have a relationship with my dad. My dad actually is in jail. He's been in jail for 7 years now. And my mom, I don't have a relationship with her either. And some people ask why. They'll be like, well, if you're a Christian, you should forgive them and have a relationship. And I'm like, well, here's the deal. If someone's not changed, if they have not changed who they are or how they behave, it is not good for us to have a relationship with them. If the abuse is still there, we revert back as an individual. So if I were to have a relationship with my mom or my dad and they have not significantly changed and they're still being abusive and still saying, well, God hates that you don't have a relationship with me. Nowhere in the Bible does it say that you need to be abused. I'm sorry. So guess what, everybody? That's not in the Bible. I respect them in the sense of they are made in God's image still. God still loves them. That does not mean that I have to have that relationship with them. My boundary is that I don't have that, because when I am around them, I've noticed that I revert back to being 13 again. That hurt starts coming up because there's words that they'll say that they know will hurt me. And I've decided that it's not worth going back and being traumatized over and over and over again, or being hurt over and over again. And boundaries are so, so good for healing. And I know a lot of people were like, well, I just have to cut everybody off. It's like, well, no, you don't have to cut everybody off. But if this person is still doing the same things over and over and over again, it's not in your benefit to have a relationship to keep hurting at the scars that are already there. And so for me, like, I had to have open contact when I took my siblings in. I had to have open contact with my mom. And that was hard because sometimes what would come in was not kind words. And it was usually, when people are like, well, what's the same behavior? Just the way that they talk to you. If the same way they talk to you at 13 is the same way that they talk to you now, that's not changed. And so in my own safety, what I would just do is I silenced her number. I would block her on Facebook. I didn't have to have. Court was like, you don't have to have this contact with her, but you have to have an open line, and either the kids have to give that number to them or you have to have your line as opened. So I took that and said, we'll do my line, but if they want to give their numbers, they totally can. But each of us have put our own boundaries there where it's like case by case. Like, I don't hate them for having a relationship if they do have a relationship with them, but most of us don't, because it's still that same person who's doing the same types of hurt over and over and over again. And if you don't know, like, if you're like, I don't know if I should have a relationship with this person, try and see what happens. But if they're coming at you in a text message because you didn't give them money, or, maybe you were open and honest about how you were hurt and they were like, well, you shouldn't say anything. That brings shame to me. And like, you're such a this or that. It's like, you should be able to say, hey, you hurt me. And the person say, you know what? I'm sorry. And it's not that weird apology where it's, if I hurt you, I guess I apologize. Or if I hurt you, I guess I'm sorry. Like, no, like, if someone says you hurt them, you need to say, I am so sorry. That was not my intention, and try to do better. But when we sit in that, like, well, if I hurt you, it's your problem. That's not a real apology. That's not moving forward. That's not helping. But I think it's kind of how you feel for boundaries, you need to be able to implement those. And that's not a shameful thing. That's not a bad thing. And that's not a sin. We have boundaries. Like Jesus had boundaries where he was just like, nope, not entering that conversation. I don't have to show up to that fight. And then he had boundaries where it was like, he's going to go take a break and pray. Like he wasn't best friends with everybody, but nowhere in the Bible does Jesus say because he was Jesus, he was going to just take these beatings and be okay with it. There were that moment where he was silent was because he was going to the cross, and that was what it needed to be for the cross. Not because, as a Christian, you have to be beat up on verbally and be friends with everybody and you can't stand up for yourself. That's where I've heard this context of the Bible and I'm like, that's not what it's talking about. Let's address that.
Oh, well, I appreciate you sharing that because I think that allows a sense of healing and like freedom for people. They're like, wait, what? Even though I'm related to you, like I can put a boundary in place. And obviously that takes time. That's a process because it's like people are so enmeshed in our lives. But just to know that freedom, like Jesus, he wants that for us. So thank you for sharing that.
There is a danger though, too, because I know sometimes what'll happen is people are like, I'm cutting off everybody and you hurt me, I'm done with you. It is case by case. So there is a danger in doing that because you want to work on relationships. But if you go to that person and say, hey, you've hurt me and I want to talk through this and I want to work through this and I don't want this to happen again. And they say, sorry, I'm not doing it. Screw you. That's not a relationship you want to engage in. But if the person is saying, you know what, I'm thankful that you brought this to me. I need to process this and then try to do better. That's a relationship you want to build on. But the danger is sometimes we get too much into trying to comfort and protect our hearts that we're just like, everybody's cut off. Like I'm cutting off everybody right and left because it's easier to do that. But there are times that we have to hit the conflict and say, I want to work on this with you. But if that person is not going to be willing to do that and they keep saying, I'm just going to hurt you over and over again, there is that you have the right to say, you know what, we're going to end this. Doesn't matter if you're blood or not. This relationship is not going to work right now because you're not willing to work on it. So I just want to make sure we plug that in because that's super important to realize.
Yeah. That's true. So for being somebody who was told from a very young age that women should not be educated, what was it like for you to walk across that stage to get your PhD? What did it mean to you?
It was weird because when I got to walk, it was like October of 2021. So it was kind of like a little while after, but there is just these times that even at graduation that I just was kind of like, oh, I got to do this. But there is that thought like, I really wish my parents were different because they should be celebrating with me. But because they hold this thing of like women shouldn't be educated, women shouldn't be outside of the house, there's just this weird tension that comes into your head because you're just like, I want to enjoy this, but then I have to quiet that voice that says, no, you can't be successful as a woman. No, you can't be educated as a woman. No, you can't teach scripture. No, you can't do this. You can't do that. And so you get imposter syndrome a lot. And I think that over my entire life, and I will probably always fight this, but there is that imposter syndrome of like, I shouldn't be here. I'm not worthy enough to be here. And God has called us into the areas that we're in, and we have to show up to God's calling. And that is where way back when, I think 13 years ago now, in 2009, I was sitting in a warehouse. I worked at a warehouse, my very first job out of high school. And I was like, I feel like I want to be a teacher. I want to be a professor. This is what I want to do. And I feel like there's not a lot of help there. And there's not a lot of people who care about people who are entering into college. And I had that conversation with my dad, and he's like, you have dyslexia because God is trying to tell you not to go that route, right? And I'm like, that's not how it works. But, that's not, no, I was very shocked. And I just remember sitting there and just feeling so hurt that he would see that. But at the same time, too, being like, did God really just put this in my way? Or is this something I should overcome? And I felt like God was opening doors for me to go to school and like flinging open doors for me to go to school. That was different for me because it was that imposter syndrome coming up of like, no, dyslexia happens because dyslexia happens. You're not being punished because you have a desire to go to school or to go the direction that you feel God's calling in. God is not going to say, go this direction for you to be set up for failure. That's not who he is. And so walking across that stage was there's just so many things where it's being a foster care kid nationally, only 3% will get higher than a bachelor's degree. it's a bachelor's and a master's, like it's kind of split between the two. Only 50% nationally are going to graduate high school. Only 48% are actually going to go to college. And so to know that I beat those statistics, it's more of like a, oh man, I made it. But also too, like there's that imposter syndrome of, should I be enjoying this right now? And it's like, absolutely. So there's this weight that I've understanding, me not understanding how significant it is, not just to have dyslexia and learn how to read at 9 years old to getting a PhD, but also being a foster care kid and being someone who was told you should not go this route. It is so big. And I'm learning like little by little, I'll be sitting there and just be like bawling. And I'm like, man, God, like you have changed the girl who entered into high school, the little 15-year-old who was like, I guess I'll go to high school because it sounds fun. I guess I'll learn how to read, finally learn how to read. And in high school, I had a really low math score. I was at a third grade math level and a fifth grade reading level going in the ninth grade. And I was just like, okay, I guess I'll just do what I can to get done because I want to be in high school and I don't want to not graduate. But then going into college, it was like, I want to teach. And in order to teach, I need to do this. If I want to teach full time one day, I need to have a PhD. And that was the route of where talking to different Christians, realizing, oh, that's not anything that Christians hold. Like they don't say women can't can't do that. But in the US, we have to have two incomes anyway. So might as well, might as well love what I do, right? But God opened those doors. And I think I'm feeling things a little bit slower than most people when it comes to the joy of that, because I'm still fighting that imposter. I'm not supposed to be here, but it is overwhelming. And walking across, like when they do this thing where they hood you, they call it hooding. It's really fun. And so they put this sash over you, and then you're now a doctor. And seeing and hearing my name being called, I was like, man, that's really cool. But then still being able, students being like, hey, Dr. Keating. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, is this real? Or Professor Keating. And I look back and I'm like, I'm here. I'm where I've been working for this for 13 years. And nonstop I went from my bachelor's to my master's in one day to the program. So I finished my bachelor's on a Thursday, and then that Friday started my master's, and then took 3 months off before going into my PhD, and then doing my PhD in 3.5 years. I haven't ever had moments to pause to be like, oh, I did that. And now I'm getting those 13 years of aha moments. And I'm like, just overwhelmed over and over again and thankful, but also wanting to reach back and be like, hey guys, let's go this way. Like if this is your journey, this is where we go. And let's do this together, because it is a lonely, lonely road when people don't understand that aspect of like, you're just spoken over multiple times in your life saying you're not worthy. You're not worth it. It's not happening. And then you're here and you're like, oh my gosh, I am worthy because God called me worthy. Like, whoa. So it's overwhelming.
It is a miracle. I mean, to reflect and think back of everything that you've gone through and, have God say, Danisha, this is good. This is good. You are worthy, is fantastic. So thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you for being honest and vulnerable with us. Lastly, let's talk a little bit about the foster care system in America. My kids and I and my husband, there's a local charity. It's called the Ruth Project. They help foster families take in, like you just said, your brothers and sisters. You got that call in the middle of the night, and all of a sudden you are a 24-year-old that now has all these children with you. You have sometimes they have no clothes except the ones that came with them. So this place offers different clothing, and if you need car seats, whatever, like they give them everything. And she kind of did the stats about brothers and sisters usually getting split up. And as a parent, I'm just like, what? I had no awareness of what was going on. And, when you're not a part of that. So what are some things that either people can do to support, like better understand this?
Man, there's a lot of statistics out there. In my dissertation, I actually focused on the best practices of foster youth support programs at the community colleges here in California. And so I talked to staff and said, what do you do to help students financially, emotionally, and academically? What is your program geared toward? What are some things, the statistics that you know of? And most commonly, every foster care student is going to have their life ripped upside down by the foster care system. And the hard part is most foster care students or youth are going to be told this was your fault. And that's usually from the parent. And I remember being told, like, if they get taken, it is your fault. I was 14, 15 at the time. And I had an adult telling me, this is your fault. This is on you because you refuse to stay at home and do this. And you choose to go to get educated. You are choosing to go to high school versus helping me with them. I was picked up on a Saturday after color guard practice. I was taken to my house. There was 8 of us and we were split between 3 different homes. So the way that it works when they split kids up is based on where they can place them. The reason that, if you come from a bigger family, if one home can only take 1 kid and they have an age preference, that kid goes there. So then the other home takes the other 2 or maybe the 1. But if they're not in this age, they say, sorry, I'm not taking them. So older foster care kids tend to get thrown to the side. And usually it's a teenage only house. And very rarely do they take siblings together. So when I was taken, there was 3 homes we were split between. I was with 2 of my younger brothers. But the whole time as an older sibling, I was like, I need to get to them. I need to save them. I need to help them. And honestly, when I was 15, I was like, we were so used to the abuse that we were going through and the abandonment. Like, it was my job to take care of these kids. It was my older sister's job to take us to school. Like, that's just when you're in a big family, that's how you think. Like, it's my role. Like, that is my one purpose in life, is to take care of my siblings. That's my goal. And so when you're in this, it's always almost worse to be taken out of it, because then you're put into a random person's house where there's these rules and you don't get time to transition. They picked me up from the school. They took me to my house. And, normally you'll hear like, oh, they get this big black trash bag that they can put stuff in. It depends on what's in the family's home. I got a small grocery sack from like Stater Brothers, very thin plastic bag. They tell you have 5 minutes to go collect what you want. Only grab what you need. I didn't grab my backpack. I totally forgot. I spaced on it. I grabbed random stuff. And when I got back to the house, I had and it was dark. So they literally, you have 5 minutes and you're like, oh my God. So you panic and you start grabbing whatever. And I got back to the home and I had 2 different shoes. One was red and one was black. I had I think 1 pair of jeans on my butt. I did not have anything in this bag. And my whole concern was my other siblings. So I was also trying to grab stuff for them. And it was like, when you looked at the bag and what was in it, you're like, there's nothing in here that goes together. There's no outfit. It's random. You didn't grab a toothbrush. You didn't grab a backpack. And yes, the foster home had a toothbrush for me to use, but then you're thrown in this bed and they're saying, go to bed. And you're like, how am I supposed to sleep? You just ran me away. And I remember the first night that we were there, and one of my little brothers, he was probably like 5 at the time. He's one of the ones that I took in. He was bawling, just crying. He goes, I want to go home. I want to go home. And the other foster girl that was there, she told me, she said, you can't talk to him. You can't. He's in bed. He's in the boys' room. And I just was like, look here, you don't know how long we've been on our own. You don't, just shush. And I went in there and I laid next to him, and the foster mom was like, you need to get out. You can't be in here. And I looked at her and I was like, he is my brother. This isn't weird. This isn't a weird thing that you're trying to make it weird. He's crying and I'm going to comfort him. And he finally fell asleep after crying. It was like 2 hours of him just crying. I want to go home. I want to go home. And I went back into my room, and she's like, the other girl, she just started saying things, and she's like, just letting you know, the rules around here are solid. And I was like, just let you know, I'm going to hit you in the face. Leave me alone. So now you have this tension of, you're in fight or flight, you're in survival mode now. And being an older sibling or a younger sibling, it impacts you the same way. But as the older sibling, you're looking out for the younger ones. And so I was very intense with my CPS worker. I think I cussed him out because, again, these people are destroying your life. He deserved it, for sure. And he was not a very nice person in general. So a lot of people, they were like, yeah, I would react the same way. But it's hard because as a foster care kid, you're like, just leave me alone. All you do is uproot my life. You take away my friends. You take away my family. And then your CPS worker will say things like, you're never going to see them again. And you're like, heck, I won't. And you use other words because you're so angry. And then people have the audacity to say, this is your fault. A lot of foster care kids, statistically, if you ask a foster care kid, ask them, Do you think that this was your fault? Some of them might be like, no, this is my parents. They were stupid. And some of them will be like, well, if I tried harder, I wouldn't have been moved to this foster home. Older teenagers tend to be moved a lot. I was threatened that multiple times. Like, if you don't get good grades by my CPS worker, if you don't get good grades, we're going to move you. If you don't behave, we're going to move you. If you show up late for curfew, we're going to move you. And you start living in this just fear of being uprooted. It got so bad that from 15 to 24, I was homeless after being in foster care. And statistically, foster care kids will end up homeless at least one time by the age of 26. And that's insane to me. But I experienced that. And I was homeless and moving around from 15 to 18. I was bouncing around. And then from 18 to 24, I had lived in my car. I was staying the night at friends' houses. I would meet friends in classrooms and like, hey, I've known you 2 times that we met for class. And they're like, hey, come spend the night. And I'm like, okay, like it's better than living in my car. But you put yourself in these dangerous situations that you don't even realize because you're just like, I just want to be home. And I noticed, I started counting. I've lived in over 30 different addresses from 15 to 24 that I've registered for. And every 6 months, like I had this really weird urge from 24 to now, like every 6 months, I'm like antsy, like I need to move. I need to do something. I need to like pack my boxes. At 28, when I bought my own home, that was when I said, okay, it's time to unpack every single box and it's time to settle in, because that's a reality for foster care, is that you're so used to being uprooted that from 15 to 28, I never fully unpacked because it was like, why bother if I'm going to move in 4 months or 6 months? So I actually wrote my own book about my journey from foster to PhD. And I talk about like, it's more of journal entries. So it's just like raw emotion. So it's not like, hey, this is how you go from this degree to that degree. It's more of just like, these are the different really big experiences I went through during foster homes. And I open up about that from my journals. So it's like real time, like that it's a reality that if you read it, you're just like, you get more of an understanding of the emotions that a foster care kid could go through. And my story, like when you think and hear my story, you're like, man, that's really bad. And I'm like, sad reality is most foster care kids have it worse. Most foster care kids won't finish high school, not because they didn't try, but because they've been moved 20, 30 times. So it's like, you get moved and then you don't get to finish school, and one school's not going to have the same academic rigor as the other one. And if you're moved in the middle of a semester, and that's what it was for us, it was the middle of a semester, you're expected to pass all your classes and then transfer what you did at one school to the other. And it's like, that doesn't work. So then they throw these diplomas together for you because, laws and stuff. And the kid's like, I can't read, I can't do math, I can't pass this test, I can't get out of the system because I have no support. And you're just left to figure it out yourself. And I think that's the heartbreaking point where, we get separated and then we get thrown out. And so there's this feeling of always being replaceable. And that's something that I've had to overcome. And I'm like, nope, that word scratched out. I am redeemed through Christ, but that's where we need more awareness. So I have started an organization. It is called From Foster to Blank. And what it does is going to help foster care kids in different ways. So people can donate things, they can donate money, they can donate clothes, but all of this stuff is going to go back to the foster care kids to be able to help them get to their goals. So if their goal is counseling, we want to help pay for that. If their goal is to go to college and they need their books, we're going to pay for the books. If their goal is to get an apartment and they don't have that 2 months for the deposit, we want to help say, what do you have? Okay, we'll pay the rest. And obviously it's new. So it's just really neat though. But it's like, I want to give back in a way that's different because there are a lot of organizations out there that are so amazing. There are very few that are geared toward the older foster care students and youth, because most of them, it's like the need is so great that it's like, yeah, of course, it mostly goes to kids that are young. And sometimes it goes to the older kids, but there's not a lot of things that are out there for them outside of if they go to college. And I think that's really hard because what if someone wants to do cosmetology? What if someone wants to just be an electrician? They need that certificate, but they might not have that money. And yeah, they could go to a community college, but what if they wanted to go somewhere else and they just can't afford the rest of it? And that's what my hope is through this organization, to say, like, whatever your dream is, I want to be able to partner with them in that. And so I'm hoping that people can just find organizations that they believe in and see like, oh my gosh, this is exactly what I want to do, and be willing to take in teenagers. That's a huge thing, as teenagers are often looked over. People think it's really hard to have a teenager. And let me tell you, any age is hard. Any kid in the foster system is hard. But teenagers, people will look at them and be like, no, I don't want them here. And that's heartbreaking to me because as a Christian, we are called to help the orphan. And yes, most foster care kids do have parents. They don't have present parents. As a foster parent, you're not replacing their parent, but you're going to come alongside that child and that teenager to say, I'm in your corner and I'm going to help you, whatever that may look like.
Wow. Danisha, thank you for your perspective. Thank you that out of, a place of brokenness that you were able to overcome, and that God was with you, and that you just kept trying. And now through your story, your passion is to help these next generations of kids. So thank you so much for sharing your story today. If people wanted to get connected to you or they wanted to learn about your organization, how can they do that?
So they can find me on Facebook. You'll look for Dr. Danisha Keating. It's going to be DR is going to be with my first name. My website. So you can go to dkeducationconsulting.com and you'll see from foster to blank over to the right-hand side. You'll click on that. And you can also Google it because it'll be available now. You can be like foster to blank and it's underscores, or you could just say foster to PhD and the book will pop up and my name will pop up and my website will pop up. So you can follow the trail. And then you can always reach out at danisha.keating@gmail.com. If people are like, you know what, I can't find you, just reach out to my email.
All right. And we'll put everything in the show notes for today. Danisha, thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for just listening.
I am so appreciative of Danisha sharing her story. It is really beautiful. Out of, the ashes, there comes new life. And she is such an example of that, showcasing how God was with her through it all. And she is now advocating for teens and youth in foster care today. Some takeaway questions to think about or journal through what we discussed today is this. Number one, what are the places or possibly people you need to put up some boundaries with? And how would that look in your life? Number two, have you been unknowingly struggling with imposter syndrome? What kind of past hurt or maybe comments or conversations that you've had that just kind of still clinging to your heart? Do you have those in your mind? Do you need to get rid of them, give them over to God, and so you can be freed up? Thank you so much for listening. You can subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts, whether Apple, Spotify, or even over on YouTube. And if you leave a rating or review, that just helps others find out about the show. We really greatly appreciate that. Also, if you want to share the show with a friend, this is a great way for you to connect and continue this conversation. But the word of mouth, it just helps people find out about the Parable podcast. So we would greatly appreciate that. If you have any questions, or you want more information about today's show notes, you can find that at daniellezapchenk.com. That is going to do it for today. Thank you so much for spending time with me. Remember, your parable showcases you are never replaceable. We'll see you back again next week on the Parable Podcast.